Hey guys, how are you doing? I feel like we have two ladies guarding the three men.
Maybe we should sit in the middle.
Yeah, we should probably be on the sofa.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen.
It's not that comfortable here.
Oh,
You're not missing out.
shade. I don't know if I should wait for the timer to start or I'll just start. Let's do it. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our panelists. We are going to be talking about AI, and we are going to be talking about specifically user-owned AI. Today we have Luki from Chainbase Network. Then we have Marko, who is a contributor at Oasis, I've been told. Michael, co-founder and CEO of Zero G. And finally, Greg, the founder of Akash. So I think we should have a pretty free-flowing conversation because I feel like this has been discussed a lot in the past few days, so we can just riff on it. But I will just like to start with one question, which is like, what is the tech moat? What is the thing that big tech has that user-owned AI or normal people don't have?
Should we just go one by one, in a way? Well, I'll just jump in. So one is computation is a centralizing force. So if you can basically afford billions of dollars of GPUs in order to train very large language models, then that's a big moat. The other moat is also being able to get access to all of the data. And what that means is initially a bunch of the data was free on the internet, but now there's all these walled gardens like APIs that are coming up, for example, on Reddit and so on. If you can afford to pay, then you can afford to get your hands on the data. Better data equals better kind of LLM models in training. So there's at least these two modes.
Yeah, three aspects of AI, right? There's data, there's compute, and models. So data on the internet is one thing, but private data is way more valuable and way bigger access, right? So user-owned data means with techniques like federated learning and whatnot, users don't need to give out the data, but rather get the models to them, right? So that's one advantage. I think folks, user-owned AI has over big tech because big tech, have to work really hard to get access to the data. And second is compute, right? So I believe, there's a lot more compute that's spread across user devices than centralized in a data center. Now with techniques that we have coming up for distributed learning and whatnot, users can own their compute and aggregate them through decentralized technologies, right? And that's happening very rapidly. Akash is one of the key leaders in that aspect. So, and we have strong product market fit, and that's growing, right? And models are increasingly getting open source. So there's this famous article from Google that said, or a leak that said, Google has no moat in models because models are getting open source. Every time you have something like a new model released by OpenAI, it gets replicated within a matter of months. Now hopefully getting to weeks, right? So code is no longer a valuable moat. And when you have open source, decentralization gives an incredible way for monetization. We're seeing that quite a lot. So I don't think just like how Linux took over, the internet, now 96% of web servers, the top 1 million websites are run on open source Linux. Similarly, we're going to see that for AI as well. Initially, it's going to be centralized companies that have an edge because, closed source tends to go fast, whereas open source tend to go far, right? So initially, it's going to be similar to how web and internet evolved, centralized companies having a leg up, but eventually it's going to be open source and user-owned future.
But okay, so let's keep it to data and compute, right? On the data front, how do you compete? Now we're having AI that's going to come on your iPhone. I think Samsung also announced a similar thing. How can a network, like a decentralized network, compete with that when you have billions and billions?
Right, so using federated learning. So federated learning is a mechanism where models can be trained locally without giving access to the data and still be federated at a higher level, right? So now user owns the data. You're not giving up the data, right? So you have full control as to whether you want to participate or what benefits you get out of the big centralized model and whatnot. So just because a model is running on iPhone, it's not running on the cloud. It's still running locally. You still have access and full control of it, right? And I believe any technology that's going to extract your data is going to have to go through quite a lot in 2024 because it's a PR disaster and a whole lot of disasters that big companies don't want to take, right? So with federated learning, you have a lot more control on your data.
The other thing I'd say, oh, sorry.
All good.
see Marko
I was just going to
nodding.
say, I think the keyword is incentives. Currently, users just get kind of something on the application layer. They get a cool UX, UI, and that's why kind of they give up this data. But once you have incentives, you can get people to share way more. I mean, you could have asked the same question regarding compute, and I think we know what the biggest computer worldwide is, Bitcoin, and that's just because of incentives.
That actually aggregates everything I wanted to say. So thank you so much for reading my mind as well. But one thing that I do want to emphasize is the governance as well. So we have decentralized computation, we talked about data and open source, we talked about incentivization. So talk about all those things that we gather together. There's the governance. We understand that there are different kind of models, different kind of agents, AI agents, big hot word. Here at ECC, everyone's talking about it. So how do we make sure that it's not biased? How do we, because one first question I ask when people are saying they're a training model, well, you're a training model centrally. You're a training model based on the data you have, based on the algorithm. You're maybe academically, you came up with a team, but how are we sure it's not biased? So that's one thing that we have in the decentralized way is that we have those open source, we have decentralization of computation and data provision and nodes provision so that we can actually come to the consensus, we can actually get out of the comfort zone to understand those are all the models that we have, AI agents, we have which one is legitimate, which one is useful.
The other thing that really matters too, so even if you talk to centralized companies, for example, I had a chat with AWS SageMaker's team, and they were saying the demand for well-provenanced, high-quality data is quite high. Even the centralized community is moving away from like, oh, just scrape any data you can on the internet to really high-quality data. And so with the incentives and everything else we've mentioned, we can actually get that. We can create synthetic data as well on top of that that's really high quality that can then be used to train things like small expert models, for example, that can then compete on that specific expert facet with the likes of OpenAI and others.
I mean, I think the question of incentives is really interesting. So what do you think are, what would be the correct incentives for decentralized AI companies, let's say, to bring people on the platform, and what else would they need?
I can talk about it, the incentivization, just to tap a little bit so that the gentlemen can also share their opinions. So incentivization, there are several types of incentivization. So think about right now, the internet is not free. Everyone, like all those big giants, they have our data. We think it's free to get on Facebook, but actually they're collecting all our information in order to sell it to another company or utilize it in a way that it's beneficial for them. So what incentivization is that if I provide my data to you in order to train, then I get incentivized because this is my right to share my data. So data providers, consumer or enterprise, there is a way for them to also get incentivized for sharing part of them. And then also the model training. So since we're talking about decentralization of computation or model training, there are different roles, different contributors in the whole ecosystem. How are we making sure that everyone has a stake of it? How are we make sure that they are actually incentivized and want to participate? So that's the incentivization is, it's not just a gold medal, it's actually something that they actually have as a tangible thing that they are able to maybe in the future stake or trade and etc. So there is some sort of rewards for people to be willing to be in the ecosystem. As I mentioned, there are different contributors. So different contributor has different kind of a incentivization strategy that's designed for them from different ecosystem. So I can let those gentlemen talk about it as well. But I believe that when people are incentivized and they have that motivation and inspiration to contribute to the ecosystem.
So we're seeing 3 levels, right? Again, like from a computational incentivization, the idea is you can own your own compute and still be able to contribute to the larger cluster, right? That's what's happening with Akash. We have incentives in pilot right now, and it's actually working out really well. So also for the first time, we're seeing a shift in what kind of compute we'll need. Like H100s were all the glory a few months ago, but now it's 4090s, right? So 4090s turns out are actually pretty good for inference workloads, and you see gaming machines having quite a lot of 4090s. So the shift from like data center grade compute to a consumer grade compute is happening, and that's incredible news because now we can incentivize home computers, right? We also have a shift from NVIDIA to AMD happening as well. So TinyGrad, which is a company by George Hotz, he's a famous hacker. We actually got the first box to put on Akash, and this has AMD latest chips with 120 gig memory, significantly better, 120 gig memory, which is significantly better than NVIDIA H100s. We're also seeing that as a home setup, not as a data center setup. So we're seeing a big shift from data center grade to home grade, and things like Dialoco, which is a paper written by Google DeepMind. I think there's a team called Prime Intellect that actually implemented Dialoco, which allows you for distributed training. So far, training is pretty homogeneous in the sense like if you train on one chip, you cannot have multiple different types of chip contributed to training. But now we have something like this, Open Dialoco, which lets you be heterogeneous in type of compute you can use to train, right? So there's a big shift happening from data centers to home-grade computers, eventually to mobile phones, right? So, and that trend is incredible for incentivization. And second is, from the models itself. So, like the fact that you need $100 million to train a model, a centralized model, is no longer true because now we have open source models. And what's the incentive for these open source developers to come? Networks like BitTensor is doing an incredible job in attracting open source models and creating incentive layers so that there is some degree of business models and sustainability to these model developers. And with the kind of quality of data, quality of computing you can get from Akash and incentives you can get from BitTensor, you're actually seeing amazing work. I mean, teams like News Research, which is the top team, is training on BitTensor and Akash, right? So this is like an example where you see. I mean, News was founded by Technium, who was like a pretty chief scientist at Stability AI, which is a centralized company which did stable diffusion. So you have top teams like that doing decentralized AI and doing purely on decentralized AI, which is very promising, right? And with data as well, I think that's an area which is still under, I would say, research. I mean, we haven't seen really strong like data guarantee or data privacy guarantees in protocols, but I think that seems to be an area of opportunity.
What is the importance of speed in this conversation? Because, I mean, and this is something like in the crypto world, a lot of people have built a lot of great technology, but having sort of left for a year and coming back later, I feel like a lot of the conversations are very similar that they were a year ago, that were 4 years ago, which is about we're still building infrastructure and so on and so forth. But in this particular area, we really are talking like some of the smartest people in the world pouring so much money to get to AGI. We don't need to talk about AGI itself, but to get to, let's say, really, really good models very, very quickly. So how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about speed?
A quick show of hands. Has anyone here used Venice.ai? What do you think of the speed? There's the answer. It works really well. It runs on Akash. So speed is a misnomer. I mean, speed in the sense latency, really, right? Do we have enough latency sufficient to train on decentralized AI? Yeah. I mean, Venice uses a model called Nous Hermes, which is running on Akash, which is trained on Akash. And also for inference, it's extremely fast, right? So that's running on Akash. So the notion that decentralized systems cannot be fast is just wrong, because something like Akash, where you get co-located GPUs, that means you can actually get clusters of GPUs that are in the same data center or in the same machine, and you can do multi-node setups as well. So Akash gives you a lot more granular scheduling capabilities that you don't normally get with other decentralized systems. So not all decentralized systems are equal, right? So it really comes down to the kind of compute and quality of compute you can get, and there are networks now that allow you to do so. Now, second problem is scale. Can decentralized systems be scalable as OpenAI? Not yet, because the cost to have thousands of clusters is not feasible right now through incentivization. But can we get there? Yeah, I mean, if you look at emissions from BitTensor, there are about $1 billion of emissions every year. Can that potentially fund large clusters? Yeah, right? So can these decentralized systems get large enough to have incentives to fund these clusters? Yeah. But it's too early to say that can we reach OpenAI scale. And unlike last year, I mean, this year we actually have real products. I mean, it's not some ideas, right? I mean, Venice AI runs on Akash, Brev.dev runs on Akash, News runs on Akash, Prime Intellect, Neural AI, all these are real products you can go use right now running on Akash, right? And we're seeing Dialoco from Prime Intellect that's running on Akash, right? So this is not just some future promise. This is real product market fit, there's real revenues, real users, and you should try it out.
I definitely agree with Greg regarding the application layer, but I think where we are missing speed is on the model side of things. Like, we're definitely losing the race compared to centralized AI in getting these better models. But better doesn't have to be larger, obviously. But that's something where we're still missing out quite a bit.
Not quite, right? So the whole trend of like this large, big parameter models being good is actually wrong. If you remember, ChatGPT forgot how to code. Right? Expert models are way better at coding than ChatGPT, right? So the larger the model gets, the dumber it gets. It may have more knowledge, but it cannot give you accurate information, right?
I absolutely agree with that, because everyone's talking about big data. Everyone's talking about aggregate all the data, as much as data. The better the data, the higher the bigger the data it is, the higher the quality the models are. But sometimes that's not true, because you get a mass amount of data, and sometimes the model just became dumber and dumber, because that's actually not, it doesn't narrow down what you want to train. So the sampling actually is not servicing the certain purpose you actually want it to service.
Well, I would say, though, it really depends on how you prompt the model as well, because you can get just as good kind of answers from very large language models if you have the right kind of subset of information in it as well. But kind of from a speed perspective, I would agree that centralized companies are moving faster on the research and development side. And I would also caution that the biggest open source model we're using is Llama 3 right now, which is a centralized company. If Meta tomorrow decides like, oh, it's been fun, goodbye, I'm not doing this anymore, then we have a major loss on the open source side. And so I'd love to see that actually move kind of fully on chain, and that's also where we're building the infrastructure so that that's even possible. So for example, if Ethereum today does 80 kilobytes per second in data throughput, like how are you going to do any type of model training, on chain if that's the reality? InfiniBand does 50 gigabytes per second in throughput. So we need that level of scale. And so that's actually one thing that Zero-G solves so that we can get to that level of scalability. But before we get there, I think we're still behind from a model training perspective.
Mm-hmm. I feel like, yeah, this question got a little bit of fire in all of you. I think the question of, expert models versus large language models is really interesting, because it does seem like LLMs really have overtaken the imagination of the entire planet, truly, right? And perhaps that is in part because they really match the big tech's like ethos, right? Which is like to get very big and have as much data as possible. Like, that is not a foundational principle per se, but it is how they operate, like how their minds operate. But on the application layer, that sounds very great, Greg, like amazing applications. I would love to use them. But who else wants to use them, and how do you truly bring like a lot of people in?
I can expand on that and let you guys go. So one application layer that I would like to emphasize is that, so there's a one paper that I read, which is 2 years ago. It's called a world model. Maybe you gentlemen already know about this as well. It's more of, you have, so large language model, we dump all the data in there to train a specific, based on specific parameters. But world model really is, you actually have, I believe it has like 6 different angles in order to train this model. So think about right now, a child, or not a child, you're driving a car and you see another car coming your way, you slow down. That's common sense. We learn as common sense. But in order to train a machine, that takes a lot of power, compute, and a lot of resources in order for this machine to understand, oh, there's a car coming this way, I need to slow down. How much do I need to slow down? So there's a lot of different trainings on that. What we're trying to solve at Chainbase is that we're trying to get at the very MVP level is get the on-chain data, off-chain data, all those different parameters of those data together for the users to make a better decision. So the easiest example is if you are asking ChatGPT, give me the top 5 trending DeFi protocols. ChatGPT probably will give you a list of DeFi protocols, maybe from an article that Eliza wrote. So it will go back to the resources, but think about there's a place that you actually, agents talk to agents so that they can aggregate all those information. So there's an on-chain transaction information that we actually aggregate from on-chain data. So they give you a list of how many transactions those 5 DeFi protocols have had, how many wallet addresses they've had, etc. Well, like how many new users they've had. So those are the on-chain data of this specific DeFi protocol, or like the top 5 DeFi protocols, right? And then maybe on the right-hand side or at the bottom, it shows you who the founders are, how much they raised, Twitter followers, and etc. So you actually have different agents talk to each other and give you a comprehensive information so that you can make decision on, oh, maybe I can pick this DeFi protocol to spend a little more time and read their docs and etc. So that reduces the time of you doing your own research, and it also give you the holistic view of what you're wanting to see.
Yeah, DeFi is all fine, but for me, it's impact, real impact, right? How is AI solving, especially how is open source AI solving problems? I saw another gentleman that came to me and talked about how they're building data centers in Africa and remote regions in Africa that is AI capable with GPUs and running local models that are being trained to do education for being tutors for kids. Providing healthcare like diagnosis, right? Like, I have a 3-month-old at home. I use ChatGPT as my co-parent, right? But so there's a lot of this I ask it all the questions. Instead of asking my mother, it answers much better and much quicker. So I see like a lot of impact that happens, and folks in Africa don't exactly have $20 a month to subscribe to ChatGPT, right? So there is this like whole new revolution happening with like ultra local compute with experts models that are helping local population and doing it so with powered by solar, right? And that's the kind of impact I like to see. And that's not going to happen with centralized models with extractive, business models. It's going to happen with local. It's going to happen open source. It's going to happen decentralized. And I think that is a significantly better impact than. DeFi is cool, but I think helping kids in Africa is better.
Can't disagree. On the application level, I think we're going towards user benefiting AI. I know we were supposed to talk about user-owned AI. That's still quite a bit away. I know Omo is working on stuff like initial model offerings, where you can actually own the models that underlie kind of lots of the logic. Maybe it will work with 0G, where you can kind of have the actual AI on-chain, and then it's easier to track all the value that was generated from it and incentivize or kind of reward users that helped in creating this model, for example, because they helped finance it.
Yeah, that's one, thank you for mentioning that. That's one aspect we haven't really touched upon yet, is we're looking at the now and today and what models are capable of today. But imagine 10 to 20 years from now, agents will be able to actually run entire systems. Let's say governance systems, transportation systems, logistics systems. In that type of world, do you feel comfortable that a handful of companies are basically controlling all of commerce at that point? How do we create something that's an antithesis to that so that truly it becomes a public good, that AI is a public good, that everybody can benefit from it, not just a handful of companies that have a centralizing force in it? And that's the type of world that I want to see. And it's possible, and I believe that the way it'll evolve is we'll have all of these kind of very large sets of expert models that will then have some type of coordination layer where then together that'll be significantly more powerful than, let's say, an OpenAI framework, just like Bitcoin is the world's biggest computer, as mentioned earlier.
Thank you for that, Michael. And with that thought, I think we have to stop talking now.
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
So as a tech journalist, what actually, like in the AI and crypto and Web3 world, what catches your eyes when you see this narrative? Like what kind of a content you are actually really interested in writing in order to attract more readers in your network?
I mean, I think as a journalist, like our job is to cut through the BS a lot. So it's not necessarily about what I'm attracted to. It's more about what I think is like important and real. And within crypto, and now within this crypto and AI world, that's very hard because it's very hyped. Which also doesn't mean that like somebody that started their project a year ago is not real or anything. It just makes it a lot harder. Now I focus more on policy. I'm based here in Brussels, and I write a lot about AI and copyright and all that, and I speak to a lot of policymakers, and nobody knows about this. Nobody knows about this, and I'm like, oh, like the exact problems you're trying to solve, there's all these people building technology to do exactly that, but truly people don't know. So yeah, I recommend you go up to the Schumann Roundabout and Place de Luxembourg, where all the parliamentarians, and find your local politician to explain to them what is user-owned AI.
Well, okay, that's my agenda for the weekend then.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the Hill. We should talk.
Sorry?
I spent a lot of time on the Capitol Hill in DC on policy, on AI policy. Happy to share notes.
Okay, great. Let's do it later. I think we do have to stop. This has been aggressively telling me to stop for a while. But thank you so much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody.